This movie had no chance. When I say 1985 comedy, what do you think of? That's right, it starts with the word back and ends with the words to the future. National Lampoon's European Vacation is directed by Amy Heckerling, written by John Hughes and Robert Klein, and stars Chevy Chase, Beverly D'Angelo, Dana Hill, and Jason Lively. And in National Lampoon's European Vacation, the Griswalds win a trip to Europe on this game show, so they go to Europe and bad stuff happens, and that's it. Now, I can imagine hearing about the idea for this movie back in the 80s, and I would think that it would be a great idea, just have the Griswolds keep going to different places and we can have our franchise and whatnot. But, as I've said before, a promising premise does not always lead to a good execution of that premise. And so while this movie has a game cast, it feels way too much like a series of sketches, like in a way that is not good like the first one was, and it's just unfunny most of the time. Wikipedia says this movie had the same budget as the first Vacation, but it doesn't really seem like they used their locations all that well, because for a movie that takes place all across Europe, it almost never shows us the beauty of these landscapes. Like, you've never seen Stonehenge more bland and less mystifying and mysterious. It's almost as if they were guerrilla shooting most of these scenes and didn't have permission to really film the places. And I almost never say this for foreign or American films, but the sound mix in this movie is often messed up. I mean, you have voices coming in at different volumes, sometimes from the same person, and it's really weird. And I know I don't really talk about sound that often, but that's because good sound is usually kind of unnoticeable, but when sound is bad, it really calls attention to itself. And of course, because the first Vacation was such a success, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they try to do the same thing here, the same editing style. This movie is still edited by Pembroke J. Herring, and he tries to repeat what he did with the first movie by making it like a sketch comedy kind of structured thing. But the result here is just way too broken. There's no overarching plot to connect these scenes, so it really just feels like all these scenes are coming from completely different movies. And it doesn't help that this movie starts off kind of bad and ends up even worse. Like, the beginning is the game show where they win their trip to Europe, and it goes on for way too long, and then the ending is super abrupt, half-hearted gag that comes out of nowhere and just concludes the movie, and it's really strange. And I hate to say that John Hughes, the man, wrote something bad, but his script here, which he co-wrote with Robert Klein, it's just full of unfunny dialogue and an almost insensitive depiction of foreigners, which to me does not make any sense because the Griswolds in this movie are the indecent ones. They're the ones who don't have any manners and whatnot. But for some reason, it's the foreigners being thrown under the bus. And while the first Vacation worked because it was something like a light satire on the American vacation tradition, this one doesn't really have that kind of satirical edge to it. It just tries to shoehorn in some sort of lesson about family and forgiveness at the end, and it does not work. I also hate to say that Amy Heckerling, the director of this movie, who also directed Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Clueless, doesn't really do anything good with this material. It's very, very bland. She relies a bit too much on physical comedy, and some of the funnier gags that thankfully don't have a lot of dialogue, they're just very plainly executed. The cast in this movie really is the only saving grace here, and they all do great work. Chevy Chase and Beverly D'Angelo are reliable as ever, and I really like Dana Hill and Jason Lively as the two kids. I think they're better than the kids who played Audrey and Rusty in the first movie because they had more to do. They really felt like they had different personalities. And Eric Idle is another standout in this movie who keeps popping up out of nowhere. They keep bumping into him as they go throughout Europe, and he's really, really funny. I wish he was in it more, like how Aunt Edna was in the first movie a lot. But in the end, European Vacation is not a very good movie. It's very mediocre. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of critics say. We'll get to the really bad vacation movies later on, but this one, I think, still has some enjoyment to be had because of the cast. Alright, so those are my thoughts on National Lampoon's European Vacation. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.